Antilles Economics proudly presents COVID-19 Strategic Insights from the Caribbean C-Suite. Today, we feature Sagicor General, and you will be listening to a panel discussion with Keston Howell, President and CEO, and Paula Walcott, Assistant Vice President of Human Resources. I am Shane Howell, Director of HR Strategy at Antilles Economics, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session today, October 7th, 2021. This is the first episode in our Spotlight series as we explore business strategy, approaches, and insights.
Good morning to you both. Thank you so much for joining us at Antilles Economics for this series of Spotlight sessions that we will be holding. We really want to kind of ignite a conversation around strategy and really to look at the different factors that impact on organizations' ability to execute on their strategy. One of those key areas that has really, affected us over the last 18 months or so has obviously been COVID. I think that we would argue, I think that everyone would agree that it has really derailed the strategy of many organizations. And we thought, as we were conceptualizing this particular session, that Sagicor would have been a fantastic addition, given that, from what we've seen as the public, I think you guys were kind of one of those early adopters, so to speak, in changing how we work or how we approach work in response to the COVID situation. And the team thought it would be fantastic if we could get you guys on board, and you've graciously agreed. So again, I want to thank you, Keston and Paula. Yeah.
Thank you, Shane. Our pleasure.
Thank you so much. Now, Keston, I know as the President and the Chief Executive Officer of Sagicor General, time is indeed not necessarily at your ready disposal. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to start with you. The first question that I really want to put to you, from your own position, did COVID impact your ability to execute on Sagicor's strategy?
That's a very strong first question, Shane. In one word, I'll probably say no. And maybe I could frame that response in the context of Sagicor's strategic objectives, which were established way back, certainly for Sagicor General in 2017. I mean, Paula and I are relatively recent members of the Sagicor family. And when our management team was looking to craft a strategy to deal with the new environment, we really focused on what I would describe as 4 key objectives. We wanted to engage our employees. We wanted to delight our customers. We wanted to improve efficiencies, and it was important for us to preserve capital. And in terms of achieving those objectives, there were some key pillars we felt that our strategy would be built around. First and foremost, we wanted to develop the right culture. That was important for us. We also felt that we needed to do some work in terms of developing our team leaders so that they would be enablers of the right culture that we wanted to promote. Communication was key for us in terms of building that culture. So in terms of leadership development, as well as our interaction with our employees, communication was key in terms of consistency of communication and meaningful communication. We also felt it would be important to empower employees because they are integral to finding solutions to the problems that the organization faces. And given the environment in which we are operating, digital transformation is also a key part of that strategy. So in the context of what I've just laid out, when the pandemic came, I would say that our strategy enabled us to pivot very quickly to deal with the important aspects of what we needed to do at the time. And the priority at that time was really to protect our employees as well as to protect our policy holders. And the work that we had done from 2017 really facilitated not only our ability to pivot quickly, but to operate relatively seamlessly as we did that pivot to what I suppose we now refer to as a remote environment. So in that sense, I would say it didn't inhibit strategy, but I suppose it enabled the work that we were doing to come to the fore, to really enable the organization to respond in a positive and meaningful way.
Okay. All right, fantastic. And I should apologize, or maybe I shouldn't. You mentioned kind of started with a difficult question, and I was raised up on West Indies cricket, and my favorite bowlers for the first ball, they were coming in strong, and I must say that you opened the batting strong and equally strong. So thank you for that. Listening to what you said though, something stuck out. When you started, the first thing that you mentioned actually was people, was kind of people-centric. It was related to people. And I was wondering if that was, by design or if that was accidental. And then you went on to speak to culture and how relevant that was. So that seems to be kind of integral to what you are looking to do. The changes that you've put in place, and you mentioned again that this kind of stemmed from the strategy going back as far as 2017. So these changes are the infrastructure, so to speak, that you've put in place. As much as I would want to say in response to COVID, would you say that these structures are permanent, institutionalized changes, or are they more so temporary changes, kind of in response to this, this kind of dynamic situation that we're in right now?
Definitely permanent. Shane, as far as permanent could be in the context of any business, because it's important for us to be dynamic in terms of response to the environment. But we do feel that the changes that we have implemented or the strategy that we've laid out provides a very solid foundation for us to deal with most environments. So in particular, if we look at the remote work environment, what we have been able to do is transition to a remote model relatively seamlessly. And the data that we collect, because we try to be a data-driven company, has demonstrated that change really has not negatively impacted, one, our employee engagement, or two, our customer experience. Because the data that we've collected demonstrates that, in fact, those numbers, both in terms of our net promoter scores for customer experience, as well as our employee net promoter scores in terms of employee engagement, have in fact increased during the period that we've been operating remotely. I think what we need to do now is, I suppose, recalibrate the remote model as we eventually transition to, suppose, what could be described as a new normal, to see how that model would operate in that type of environment. So in that context, I suspect that we will in fact be calibrating it, but I really see the way we operate now as the way of the future. And it has enabled us to one, improve our efficiencies because we've been able to consolidate our office space within the Sagicor group. We need less square footage, so that's an obvious benefit. But as well, in a strange kind of a way, notwithstanding the fact that we're operating remotely, we communicate far more frequently, which I think has benefited the organization as we have in fact moved to that kind of hybrid model.
Okay, so it's interesting that you would mention that the communication has actually increased, because I mean, as we read different articles and we hear different business leaders and so on talking, communication actually is one of those things that many companies are kind of grappling with at this point in time as they try to negotiate, these changes and so on. Again, it takes me back to what you would have said before about those things that you had identified that you needed to work on, culture and people and leadership and so on. And with all of those different things to be done, and again, taking into consideration the impact of COVID, where we went to sleep, it almost feels as though we went to sleep one day in one world and literally woke up the next day and everything was different. How did you determine kind of what took precedence? And I'm thinking Sagicor, a massive organizational machine with so many moving parts. How do you determine what took precedence in your change efforts?
Shayna's one is easy. Our people always come first. I make the point that if you don't have happy employees, you won't have happy customers. So everything we do revolve around our people. Employee engagement is important to us. Unfortunately, we have in Paula an HR professional who thinks very strategically and has enabled us as we develop our strategy to really build a culture and activities around employee engagement so that people are at the very center of what we do. And really, I don't see that changing at all. So as we pivoted, the first thing that we considered, and we were very first movers in the context of remote work before the governments across the region decided to lock down. We had made the decision, given the so much unknown at the time, to operate remotely. I think I'm trying to remember our tagline. I think it was close to protect, open to serve. That was the tagline. And we were able to do that because of the work that we had done before. So people, both our employees as well as our customers, are at the very center of what we do. We really believe that.
Okay. And there's an interesting perspective to have. You're always going to hear those discussions of whether employees first, customers first, shareholder value first. And you've positioned employees as being central to what you do. And I think that's the perfect segue to kind of introduce Paula now, the Assistant Vice President of Sagicor, and admittedly someone who I know personally, and if you want to say semi-professionally, given the work that she's done through the Human Resource Management Association of Barbados as well. So Paula's voice has been heard quite often, I think, in the employee engagement space. And, just as an advocate for people, but as you rightfully said, with a very strategic mind. So Paula, I want to speak to you at this point. Apparently my questions to Keston have started to get a bit easy. So, so let me shift to you, to ask the question in light of what Keston was saying with respect to, your strategy didn't necessarily have to change per se, but did you find that any of the competencies required of your team members changed to support any variation or even to support what you guys had envisioned from before? Did you see a change in what you required from your people?
What I would say, Shane, is that we would have established as a part of our cultural transformation 10 leadership principles that would guide behavior for all of our people leaders, regardless of where they sat to serve the team. And if I look at those 10, certainly we needed to draw a lot heavier on some of them after the pandemic came. So agility would have come to the fore. One of our principles is fosters communication, inspires trust is another one. And imagine everything you could have done in person, pivoting then to a remote world, and why those particular things had to come to the forefront. The good thing about it is that we had already started that process. So in terms of educating our people leaders about what was required and what was important and how they too can help us to support the strategy by prioritizing people, that became a lot easier. So it's not necessarily that we had to find new competencies. It was about digging into who we were as a people, who we had said we would be as leaders, and then prioritizing accordingly.
Okay. So, Keston, let me ask you then a very pointed question. Did your own leadership style have to change? The way in which you led kind of pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic? Was there any change that you think you can identify?
I mean, I really can't think of any one change. What I do know is very early when we transition, and I was making the point that we communicate more frequently. One of the things I established very early on would have been weekly management meetings. Because of the group before, we'd probably have met maybe once a month, and then in the various departments, we'd meet maybe more frequently. But I thought that given what was happening and the fact that we were operating remotely, it was very important for us to be in regular contact and just give updates in terms of what's going on, as well as give people an opportunity to share what the experience was like. And what we did at those sessions is we encouraged the team leaders as well to have similar sessions with their respective groups. So I think in the early days, it really facilitated a closeness that in an odd way we didn't have before we in fact migrated to remote work environment. Now that things have settled down, we still have maintained that structure. We've just kind of adjusted the frequency as we begin to be a little more comfortable in the environment. So if I were to identify one aspect of my leadership style, I would say would be communication. The communication was far more frequent than would have been, certainly in terms of the management team, say pre-COVID.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, I want to jump back to you, and you called one of my favorite words, which is trust. And by that, I've said for a long time that when we think of organizational currency, trust is, I find it hard to think of anything that is more valuable than trust within an organization, whether that be between, management, employees to employees, customers and the business, whatever the case may be. I want to get a sense from you, how important do you view trust in what you sought to achieve? And again, especially in this period, and what would have been done to try to facilitate trust building, if indeed it was something that was a focal point for you?
Okay, so I agree with you, Shane. Trust is foundational. It's absolutely critical. And the thing about trust is that we know it's gained or lost one interaction at a time. Mm-hmm. The relationship that we have with our team is built on several interactions and all those moments that matter. So if you don't have that pre-crisis, so pre-COVID, if that did not exist and was not a focal point, our business would not have been able to pivot the way we did. You heard Catherine talk about how seamless that transition was. That happened because trust was embedded into the culture that we were building. And as I alluded to, it is actually identified as one of the leadership principles. So the fact that we've prioritized that specifically as something that we had to do before helped us when we made the change. What becomes difficult in a remote environment is where you're now onboarding new people into your culture and feel like you've lost some of those moments that matter. So we've been very, very intentional about how we onboard, even how we recruit in this environment. Our onboard into our culture happens from the moment you accept our offer. A member of my team who has not been, she supports the Eastern Caribbean. She's not physically been on a plane since COVID to go there. We've boarded, I would say, at least 4 people, including a people leader. And all of them, every one of them has said, this is the best place they have worked. Now, they are obviously looking at their own experience, but they can also gauge it from the indicators of the team members in their locations and what they say about the company and what's prevailing, because the culture really will speak for itself and it can live remotely if the foundation was already set. The difficulty that some organizations may face is that they're now trying to build this from scratch without having the benefit of having put in that level of work and intentionality before.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, and particularly onboarding a people leader. You would have obviously spoken to some of the work that has gone in to develop the team and to grow them, in accordance with the values of Sagicor. But for this people leader, no, this is someone that you're bringing in from the outside. You've had to onboard them, remotely. How was it getting that person kind of in line and operating in the Sagicor way, given that you don't have those same touch points as you mentioned before and so on?
Well, it's all aligned. So when we recruit, the questions we ask specific to our culture. So also, in addition to those 10 leadership principles, we have 5 cultural standards. And every interview process is built around those things. So it's a behavioral type interview. Those are the kind of questions we ask. And we get a sense from the very first interview whether you will fit in with and enhance our culture. Because obviously, culture will continue to evolve. We don't want a scenario where we stagnate because we come up with these 5 cultural standards and that's it. We want people who can come in, who align, but who are also willing to push the envelope with us and take the business forward and drive improvements and engage our people. So in terms of who we selected for the role, she would have been selected specifically because of all the candidates, she was the one best aligned to what we were building, where we were going, and who we identify as.
Okay. Thanks for that. That was very, very useful information. I want to take the conversation and what might be a slightly more sensitive area. And by that, Kirsten would have made the point about the business valuing feedback, looking closely at data and making data-driven decisions. Now, whether it be formally or informally, Paul, I'm going to point this question to you because of where you sit. Have you seen mental health implications as a result of COVID, of the pandemic and everything that's around it? Obviously, mental health has become a far more topical in recent times. Have you seen that, again, where you sit, Assistant Vice President of HR, what has been your experience?
I would say definitely, because uncertainty breeds anxiety, right? In the most resilient human being. At the end of the day, we are all different individuals, but we're facing very similar circumstances in the sense of this was an unknown. So in the initial stages, what we did was to get up in front of it. We reached out to our team to find out who actually had the comorbidities. If they wanted to share that with HR, the information came straight to us. What allowed us to do was the minute that the first cases were in Barbados, we were able to prioritize who could get out of the company and start to work remotely. Even before that happened, because we were proactive, we were able to get our asthmatics and our pregnant team members to work remotely before cases were even recorded in country. So things like that we are able to do because we reached out and we're proactive. Now, to link that back to mental health, understand how the additional impact would be to someone who's hearing all of this rhetoric around a virus that we don't know, and they're hearing about the impact specifically to people who are vulnerable. You're now heaping some additional anxiety on top. So that's why we prioritize that group very early on. We also took the decision to extend our employee assistance program. Previously, we were given a finite amount of sessions per year per employee or per employee and their family members. We extended that and we made that very clear. We also onboarded an additional employee assistance program provider who was able then to not just serve Barbados, but to serve the Eastern Caribbean and Trinidad because of the virtual environment that person was able to be comfortable operating in. So there were several things we did to support that. In the process of that, what our HR team did when we finally closed our doors but remained open to serve, our HR team took the entire staff list, split it up, and it was our job, part of our actual job every day to make contact with the people on our assigned list. And that was so we could check in. So a lot of times people prioritize people who had homeschool and things and single parents. But some of the research is coming back saying that people who are single and have no kids are actually more vulnerable to mental health challenges because of the isolation. So that one person they spoke to outside of a customer that day was an HR person. It didn't matter because we were very intentional about how we were going to support the team.
Okay, fantastic. So that brings me to the interesting question. I'm still along the same kind of dimension, but whose list were you on? As the head of HR, oftentimes As leaders, you are obviously in a position where you have to look out for the interests of the business, the interests of the people, etc. And the question kind of, no one ever really says it, and that's why I wanted to ask that question. Who's taking care of the leaders? So whose list were you on? Who was checking in on you? Or equally, how were you taking care of yourself in obviously what was a high stress situation?
Let me first say that 1 week Caston was on my list and I did call him. But my team, my does not miss a beat. There was a period, I think it could have been like early days in the pandemic. So the cases came in March. So let's call it May or June. Mm-hmm. Sitting at home working and seeing an email pop in, and it was an intervention email from the team. Hey, we know you're working really hard, but you need to take some time off. And got your back, so please go. And that was their way of saying, look, you need a mental health break. And we talk about it openly. If somebody is struggling, they know they can say it, and similarly. So if I'm really overwhelmed, I can say, guys, look, I need to knock off early today, and early for us sometimes might be 4 o'clock, but that's not the point. The point is I have that permission from my, and they similarly have that permission from me. Caston can tell you, I have said to him in the past, boss, I need a mental health break. That's something we say. So it's not really a policy anywhere, but it's accepted. So for me, having the comfort level to know that I can take a time out, I can pause, has been very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'd just like to add to that, because what we also do have, we have several groups, informal, I suppose, WhatsApp groups or whatever it is, and the support provided by those groups as well. Sometimes it's just an opportunity to vent, or to I suppose what we call safe zones, where if things not going the way you would like it to, you could vent in a safe space. I think that has also helped in terms of the mental health of the team, and the team has been very together and very supportive through this pandemic. I must admit that.
So that was enlightening. I didn't know that presidents and CEOs get to vent. I was always wondering who you guys would vent to. But I actually just want to further build on that. So outside of Paula's check-in, have you yourself, Caston, taken or adopted, I should say, any particular strategies or any form of outlet to kind of protect your own mental health during this period?
I answered the question before, Shane. That's exactly what I do. I vet. We have a close group where we feel it is safe to do so. One could be vulnerable in that group without judgment. It allows persons to receive support and just a kind word at the time when you really need it. And that has made a significant difference throughout the pandemic. And even now, I think things have, I wouldn't say we are more certain now, but while things have stabilized, it still is very useful, not with respect to other challenges that may come up professionally with the organization. So that, I would say, has been an invaluable tool for me in terms of coping.
Okay. So let me ask this, reflecting on, maybe we're still in the midst, of the pandemic, but what would you say at this stage has been the key takeaway for you? And I guess then this one is for you, from this experience, from this pandemic experience thus far?
Oh, that's another tough one, Shane. I think the key takeaway for me is the COVID pandemic has reinforced the importance of, one, employee engagement, and building an environment where people feel safe emotionally and are able to share without any fear of recrimination or judgment in the context of their own vulnerability. And that is easier for some and more difficult for others. But I think if you build an environment where people feel safe doing so, and it doesn't necessarily have to be to the CEO or even to the AVP HR, but in terms of the smaller groups where we have various teams, we seem to have developed a culture where people feel comfortable in doing that. And therefore, there are various levels of support for persons throughout the organization. And it has proven very valuable as we move into this kind of environment, which allows persons to operate but feel connected and feel valued. So in that sense, I really think the work that we've done in terms of building our employee engagement, empowering our team leaders to understand what are the key competencies that are required to treat with the whole concept of leadership in a changing environment has reaped dividends, which in my mind go far beyond coping with the pandemic. And it also, I'm also one of those leaders who understand that as people go on their journeys, they move on. And I think we could feel a great sense of satisfaction that persons may leave and go on to other organizations or go on to other, as they fulfill their own dreams, and would look back with fondness relative to the way in which we equip them to handle different scenarios or environments.
I must admit, the focus or the way that has been ascribed to people is pleasantly surprising. And maybe I'm speaking with a slight bias as my background as an HR practitioner and so on. You would expect maybe to hear a bit more about digital transformation and the tech and new products, et cetera, to be able to still appeal to the market. So the approach that Sagicor has taken, I must admit, I'm very intrigued by what I'm hearing. But I am going to take it there though, because again, we're looking at strategy and digital transformation still is a fundamental part. And you, both of you would have actually kind of touched on it before, that this was a part of your efforts, the digital side of the transformation, the digital shift. I know that there was one study that I was reading that spoke to the fact that internationally, globally, digital products have kind of been accelerated by about 7 years. So essentially what we're seeing now, we would have really and truthfully expected to see 2028 or so. For you, for where you sit and for the business with Sagicor, how has the digital transformation shift presented itself within your organization?
Sure, I think we've done a good job in terms of building the infrastructure. So as we build our digital transformation or roll out our digital transformation roadmap, we have expanded or improved the ability of our customers to interact with us digitally. But there is a disconnect in the sense that notwithstanding what we have done in terms of improving the ability to do so, it is remarkable that how many persons still want to speak to someone in person. So you may think that yes, the environment is forcing individuals, companies, organizations to move digitally. But in a sense, there is an impersonal aspect to interacting digitally, which I don't think Caribbean societies are quite prepared for as yet, or they're not ready to embrace that in the way that I suppose more developed countries have. So, I mean, I try to look at data very often. So just recently, I was looking in terms of the use of the various digital portals we have, both in terms of portals to allow advisors to get quotes, in terms of to allow our customers to submit claims, in terms of making payments digitally as opposed to coming in the office. And the numbers are I would say they're surprising, but they're eye-opening, because the level of utilization of those various digital channels is nowhere close to where we thought it would be.
Mhm.
And what that speaks to, again, is just the journey that it will take for us as a society to evolve in terms of where digital transactions become the norm. If you look at the banks, and I make this point to my insurance colleagues all the time, it took a very long time for something that is very commonplace, which would be ATMs, to take hold. Banks introduced ATMs very early, and for a long time, the utilization was poor. It has become far more commonplace.
Mhm.
But even within the banks, in terms of online transactions, if you speak to the bankers, they will tell you, or they will bemoan the fact that the use of online banking is nowhere where they would like it to be. Because at the end of the day, people still like to deal with people. So, you know, I tell people, even as we work on our digital transformation roadmap, we are still very mindful of the fact that human interaction will always be a key component of our business. And while we provide the tools to facilitate those individuals who may prefer that as a channel, we cannot turn a blind eye to those segments of our customer base who still want to interact personally. And therefore, while we may encourage remote transactions in the context of a pandemic environment, which necessitates us to minimize the amount of persons in the office, and it may be an opportunity to, I suppose, accelerate the acceptance of those channels by our customers, I think we need to be continually mindful, even as we look at those channels, that we don't dehumanize the way we treat with our customer base. And that's something we're very mindful of. Okay. Because then it becomes a commodity. What makes Sagicor different to another company? Ultimately, it's your people. And that has to be seen even in the context of a digital transformation journey. We need to still find a way of making people feel connected to the organization in an emotional way, because only when customers can, the strength of a brand really revolves around the emotive content, how people feel about that brand. Mm-hmm. And that's important. So we still need to connect even as we roll out our digital channel.
So as I listen to you, then a word that I believe you mentioned earlier, which is dynamism, in how you approach the strategy is critical, because again, what is coming out to me listening to you is that yes, you had a digital transformation strategy, yes, you had certain goals and what you thought the uptake would be and so on, but the reality is, for many, this technology was kind of thrust upon them. You want to do business, there's no other way. This is the technology, you have to use it almost. But as I'm listening to you, I'm hearing, but we recognize that some persons are still not comfortable in that space, and we're listening, that is, we're looking at the data, and it sounds as though you're willing to respond to that need, if that is what your customers are saying. Am I correct in what I'm
hearing? Definitely. To do so would be insensitive to the persons who really pay our salaries. It doesn't mean that we won't work in terms of getting people more comfortable with those channels. Mm-hmm. But it can't, to use your word, it can't be thrust on them. It has to be a process where we try to educate and get persons comfortable with a channel which they may not intuitively feel that comfortable with. And that's going to be a process. So I continue to believe that while a digital approach is inevitable as we move forward, I think the journey, certainly in a Caribbean culture, is going to be longer than, say, it was in developed countries, whose lifestyle is very different.
Okay. Thanks for that. Paula, you said something in an interview recently, actually with Ron Johnson, that resonated with me. You spoke to the the first community that any organization essentially has an obligation to is their internal community, that is their employees. And I'm hearing repeatedly from both yourself and from Keston that this is something that you guys take very seriously, that internal community. Yeah. Based on the experience thus far, you actually made mention of the engagement scores actually improving over this period of time, which is, I think, something that is almost unprecedented, to be honest with you. I've spoken to some key things like trust and so on, but is there anything else, and particularly any lesson that you would like to leave, or any particular point you would like to leave with HR practitioners and business leaders on a whole with respect to managing their own internal communities?
To choose one, so this is my bouncer now. To choose one thing that I would say, I think the one thing I would say is to become, if you're not, to become emotionally intelligent, and if you already are, really dig in and dive deeper into that. And I say that because emotional intelligence really is the foundation of what has gotten us where we are, and being deliberate about helping our people leaders to be a lot more in tune with what's going on with their team, and being able to respond in a way that drives the business forward and connects. How our team members show up is dependent on how we show up most of the time. I mean, Gallup research will tell you 70% of the variance in employee engagement comes from their direct manager. So how you show up as a leader, how you show up as a manager for your team and for yourself really is going to have a direct impact on how they show up for each other in your presence and your absence, which is now because of all the remote work we're doing. And that then is going to make its way outside of your organization in how they show up for your customers. How many times have we gone somewhere as HR practitioners, Shane, and just know that the culture sucks because of how we're treated at the front? So if we don't take care of our people cannot take care of our customers well. And that link has to be made, whether you're an HR or whether you're an entrepreneur. How you treat the people is going to have an emotional impact on them. And whether you want to call these soft skills or not, I frankly don't, because emotional intelligence is a power skill. There's nothing soft about it, right? At the end of the day, if you do it well, your business will soar. You will have a company of high performers. And that is going to have a direct impact on your bottom line, which is going to delight your shareholders. So if you can't speak in those terms, then you need to be able to show them this matters, people matter, in order for you to get the result that you want. You don't get that. You can get that result without focusing on your people. But imagine what that result looks like if you are intentional about being a people-centric organization.
So I guess my takeaway as I'm listening to you, and I get ahead of everyone else that will be listening, I think my takeaway is really about making it an organizational priority. So I think oftentimes when we speak about emotional intelligence, it seems kind of one-off, kind of piecemeal. You know, a particular people leader is not doing a good job, and you say that person is not emotionally intelligent. But what you're speaking about is making it an organizational priority, a strategic priority to be delivered.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And to put, I guess, to put the force behind what I'm saying, we would have this year, with 74% of our employees still remote, we have done emotional intelligence training across the organization. So this is not a leadership skill. This is organizational imperative that everybody shows up more emotionally intelligent. And to take it a step further, if we have a community of people within Sagicor who are more emotionally intelligent, their families benefit and our society at large will benefit from the fact that they're showing up as the best version of themselves and bringing their whole selves to an interaction. So it benefits everybody.
Okay. So I'm going to be a bit facetious here, and I'm going to ask Kirsten, you know, listening to Paula, she speaks the language, or what some would argue, the language of an HR practitioner when she speaks about emotional intelligence and so on. But as the CEO listening to that and thinking shareholder value and thinking get the technology in place, and traditionally all of these hard skills, you know, that we look at and that businesses focus on. How was it for you adapting or listening to this language and speaking this language that Paula is speaking so eloquently? How was that experience for you?
Very easy, Shane, very easy, I suppose, because I may not have been able to express it as eloquently as she has, but I think deep down, I have always led with that kind of mindset or framework. And I tell people all the time, as a leader, my job really is to try to empower persons who work with me to achieve their dreams. That's really what I'm to do, and to help you achieve that in whichever way I can. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be soft or soppy. What it means is I need to be in tune with what your goals are, to listen effectively and do what I can to enable the team and the individual to achieve those dreams. Sometimes that calls for tough love. You know, people have a view sometimes that being emotionally intelligent is being soft and soppy and kind of keeping in. It really isn't. Because to manage performance sometimes requires a leader to have difficult conversations, but to have those difficult conversations in a very constructive way. So that after the conversation, the individual really could understand where the gaps are and buy into the need for change to take place. Because in the absence of an individual saying, you know what, I acknowledge that there's a gap, I understand that I need to do certain things to close this gap, is not going to happen. We can't force it. I can't force an employee to do something that employee doesn't want to do. All I could do is try to open up that employee's mind to begin to change, whether it be attitudes, whether it be skills. That's what we need to do. So in that sense, I suppose my personal philosophy had already been there. So it was very easy to buy into what Paula's vision for the organization was. But I think what is different about Paula as an HR practitioner is that there's a very strategic element to how it all fits in. So it's not just about the being, I suppose, nice or being understanding. It really is about how ultimately, if we get these things right, it fits into delivering the results. And I always tell people, I don't focus on results. It's not to say that I don't measure it or I'm not very aware of the need for us to make our targets. I always focus on the process, because I believe that if you get the process right, the results take care of itself. And what I continue to track with persons all the time is the process, even as I evaluate performance, because I think if you're doing the things that, if we agree that the process is right, and you're doing the things that we agree that should be done to achieve the result, you will eventually get the result. And if you're not getting the result and you're doing that, it means that maybe we need to have a rethink in terms of what the process or the strategies are, and try again. But really what we try to focus on at Sagicor is on the process. And as we focus on the process, is to get the right people to focus on that process and to execute, because execution is another key component of success. Because you could have the right strategy, but if you don't have the ability to execute in the way that you should, you're not going to be successful. And all that, to get back to the foundation of what we're saying, revolves around people. You know, half the job is done, I tell people, if from a recruitment stage, you bring the right person on board. In fact, probably more than half. Because once you have the right person, from an individual sense, you have the right person. So collectively, we have the right team. That right team is going to come up with the right process. And that right process, properly executed, is going to deliver the results. So that's what we're trying to do. And I would say we've had fair success, and we're very proud of what we've achieved. And we continue to hope that the organization continues to thrive in that kind of environment.
Okay. Thanks for that. And I know he was accused of bowling bouncers and so on earlier, so I'm not sure if you recognize. No, that was a bit more of a spin ball. That was a bit slower, but you were able to navigate that bit of like break quite effectively. So obviously, it is something that you subscribe to. Paula, I want to speak very quickly to the issue of diversity. I know to many persons listening, it might seem like a strange topic because there's a view that I've heard in some circles that Barbados does not have a diversity issue, that we are essentially a very homogenous society. So while the rest of the world is looking at diversity as being a strategic priority, again, there's a view that we don't have to look at, we don't have to look at those issues. COVID has kind of come in and said, you might need to pay attention to this diversity thing, because there's research to show that COVID has disproportionately impacted some groups more than others. In some cases, females, in some cases, persons with children, or those who have child care responsibilities, which is not obviously exclusive to females, or parent care. Mindful of those diversity realities and those diversity challenges, would you say that this is something that Sagicor has paid attention to in its efforts to pivot and to support staff during this time?
So for me, I always say to people, when you bring up the diversity challenges, where's the inclusivity, right? And my focus is always more on the inclusivity. Let's have that conversation. How are you allowing these people you have identified to participate and show up as their best selves in the process? So for us, that was a factor. We would have made allowances for persons who have elderly parents at home to continue to work from home. We've made allowances for people who have to deal with homeschool. I myself have to deal with it once we're doing online school. So we have made those allowances, but we've also taken it a step further, because we've identified we're trying to allow them to be able to straddle and balance their life, but are we helping them with the skills? And that's where we've had several sessions, call them lunch and learns, whatever you want to call them, where we have had professionals come in to talk to our team members. We've addressed all kinds of topics, even mom guilt, because that's something that a lot of people started to struggle with, because it's, how do I find time for self-care when I'm balancing homeschool, I'm dealing with an elderly parent, I also have my deliverables for my job. How do I manage that all? We've had a trained psychologist talk our team through guided meditation and how to include that in their daily living and things like that. So we have taken the conversation beyond just identification, because diversity, you identify, yes, these are the groups that exist. And then what? We've taken it a step further and made sure that we put actionable steps behind it that allow us to really support these persons having identified who they are.
Okay. All right. Thanks for sharing that. So at this point, we're getting close to the end. So I can't get anybody out, so I just concede and finish my over, so to speak. But I want to pose this question to both of you. I intentionally so. No, I will not use the word rebuild because I don't think it is a situation where Sagicor has been fractured by COVID. So I will more so use emerging from this period, emerging from this pandemic state, so to speak. How do you see the role of HR supporting your continued strategic efforts? This is against a background of, traditionally, and I don't want to assume, but traditionally, you find that the HR budget is the one that is cut, the training eases back, their staff cuts, et cetera, et cetera. Listening to you, I'm hearing meditation, I'm hearing all these different forms of intervention. So it almost sounds as though that training budget may have actually gone up, I don't know. But how do you, where you sit, Paula, as the HR professional, Keston as the CEO and president, how do you see HR's role in the continued strategic efforts of Sagicor?
Am I going first?
I'll let you go first on this one, Paula.
I see HR continuing to partner with the business and to lead. At the end of the day, we are a people-centric business. What we do provides a service to people. And it's impossible to separate the people from the business and from the process and from the results. So we will continue in HR to take lead where we need to lead. We will continue to spot check people when we need to spot check them to say, hey, I'm sorry, somebody's missing from this conversation. And where the people, on the other hand, are the ones who are not showing up, we will help them and encourage them along. Because at the end of the day, a successful Sagicor is successful not just for leadership, it's successful for everybody. And it's also successful for our nations, because let's not negate the fact that Sagicor, the brand, the company, the people, has made a tremendous contribution to the nations in which we operate. So I see HR still being there at the forefront. I mean, COVID kind of landed on our shoulders and burdened us in the beginning, but I believe we found our strength and we continue to execute on our strategies. And once we do that well, the business will continue to do well.
Thanks for that. And he opened the button and it looks as though he will be closing it as well. This was a fairly long.
I don't know what is the more you want me to add to that response? I don't know if there's more I can add to that. What I can say is as we emerge from the pandemic, whenever that may be, because I see this as something that we will have to learn to live with, certainly for the next 2 to 3 years. We have to find a model or a structure where we begin to determine as an organization, how do we respond and work in this new norm? And as we move to develop that structure, as well as the processes, I think that the HR department is going to be integral in terms of helping us shape that in the right way. And let me just, I suppose, give you an example. So even as we operate in a what I will describe as a hybrid model of remote and their persons in office, we need to start thinking in terms of simple things like what do our offices look like in the future? Just in terms of how we structure those offices. Do we have a situation where we have persons who would come in the office and that we need to develop to manage the situation that we are in? And all of these things, really, HR is going to be an integral aspect of. So I really think this is going to be a watershed period where you'd see organizations transitioning their operating models to deal with a new norm that speaks to a different way of working and a different way of managing the resources as they operate remotely. And the HR team is going to be essential in terms of helping the rest of the organization transition in a very efficient and productive way.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that insight. Listening to you, it literally just sounds as though HR is part of the conversation and not being included into a conversation that has already been had. So thank you for that bit of guidance. Thank you for that insight. But I really want to say thank you to you both for taking the time to share with us today. Again, I'm very cognizant of your schedules and what that might look like with a regional portfolio and with all that is transpiring. But I think beyond thank you for the time is really about what you were able to share, that I am confident will be insightful for the average person, but even more so for other business leaders and other organizations as they reflect on their own experience and kind of chart their own course. So I really appreciate the openness via Anthony's. Really thank you for agreeing to be the first, because this is indeed the first of a series of spotlight sessions that we will have to speak about strategy, and not just from an HR kind of perspective, but strategy on a whole, strategy from looking at other functional areas within the business or other components that shape strategy. But being the first is always difficult. And you guys opened the baton in a fantastic manner. So we really appreciate that. Thank you guys so much. And we hope to be in contact sometime soon where we may be able to expand this conversation and have even a few other voices, whether it be virtually or if we find a way, as Keston would have said, to live with it. And maybe we're able to fly you in, Keston, to have a face-to-face conversation and do this over some coffee. So thank you both. It's really been a pleasure and actually very insightful for me, something that I've really been able to take a lot from. So thank you guys and have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thanks, Shane.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, have a great one.